in our world today. So, enough of a rant. In Genesis 15, we have another of the outworking of the Abrahamic Covenant. Because the Abrahamic Covenant is first mentioned in Genesis chapter 12. That Genesis 12 verses 1 through 3 passage is not the beginning and the end of it. It's not the entire extent. If you pick up Arnold's manuscript on the 8 covenants of the Bible, you'll see a little bit of a greater depth of that. I highly recommend to you the unabridged edition of Israelology. Everyone has their favorite Fruchty book. Mine is Israelology, unabridged, the original raw one. And so I would really encourage you to understand the place of Israel from that book, where he really mows down every attack from other theologies on this thing. And so and we're going to just survey this very quickly. This is not a course on covenants, not even a course on the Abrahamic covenant, but we need to survey very quickly. Look in Genesis 15, and if you look at verse 4 and following, Genesis 15, verse 4, you'll see that one of the provisions, one of the outworkings of the Abrahamic covenant is the provision of land. To the people of Israel, God gave the land of Israel. Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael. The people of Israel, the land of Israel. Am Yisrael, Noten Elohim, Eretz Yisrael. To the people of Israel, God gave the land of Israel. And so in Genesis 15, in verses 4 through following, we have further provisions of the Abrahamic covenant. Very quickly, in verse 4, we're told that Abraham was told to go outside. Verse 5, Abraham was told to raise his eyes toward heaven, count the stars if you were able to count them. And then God said to Abraham, so shall your descendants be. So Abraham here, who had no physical children, is now being told that he and Sarah are going to have children. And so this is the start of the people of Israel. Some of the other passages, and again, in the manuscript very quickly, you can look at the other passages that deal with the land aspect. Let's go on to Isaiah chapter 49, where the Abrahamic covenant is further traced. Isaiah chapter 49, verse 14, further talking about this eternal nature of the Abrahamic covenant, a very important passage, Isaiah chapter 49, verse 14. But Zion said, by the way, this is called kvetching. But Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me. That's a complaint. A kvetch is a complaint. Zion is complaining to God. God has forgotten me. Oh, woe is me. Oy vey is mir. Things are not going well. Yeah. And here's God's response to him in verse 15. Can a woman forget her nursing child and have no compassion on the son of her womb? Well, the wonderful thing we've always seen is mother's love for a child. It just pushes everything out. The welfare of the child is most important. But in an extreme situation, in a situation of war, in a situation of natural calamity, with mental disease, sometimes a woman might even abandon her child. Even these may forget, but I will not forget you. Behold, I have inscribed you on the palms of my hands. In Hebrew, there are words that talk about intensity. When you write something, it's just like, the passive form is like kitov, katav. But when you inscribe something, there's a whole different set of vowels that make it much stronger. I've engraved you on the palms of my hands. Nothing is going to change that. So there's the Isaiah chapter 49 passage. We're going to survey the others in Jeremiah 31. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel. In other words, in Jeremiah 31, it says that the Mosaic law, so you have the oldest covenant with the Jewish people is the Abrahamic covenant, okay? So let's start it over here. So here we have the Abrahamic covenant. Then the Abrahamic covenant continues on. Moses goes up the mountain, receives the Mosaic law. At a certain point, Israel is in the process of breaking Mosaic law. God still has a relationship with Israel. But wait a second. How can God have a relationship with people if they're now breaking his law? His relationship with Israel is not based on Mosaic law. His relationship with Israel is based on the eternal Abrahamic covenant. Once again, if you get that, if you understand that, the Bible makes a whole lot more sense. You won't be thrown about by every new wind of doctrine, by every new wind of Christian theology coming out, because you don't need to invent anything new. It's there. There's no need to become a progressive because it's an invention of brand new ideas when the ideas that God gave are right there. And so in this Jeremiah 31 passage, it illustrates for us that God still calls the Jewish people his own in spite of the fact that they are sinning. We'll not have time to turn there, but in Romans chapter 11, God once again restates his eternal love for the Jewish people. This is after the cross. This is after the high priest conspired with the Romans, and after the Romans nailed him to the cross. The old charge of deicide, well, we don't like you Jews because you killed Christ, that old horrific charge is totally refuted in the book of Romans, where we're told that the Messiah died for all. In the Gospels, no man takes my life from me. And again, these are the important things of the Abrahamic covenant. We won't turn there, but the other passage you see here, I told you to write it in your notes. 1 Chronicles 16, verse 13 through 18. That talks about the fact that the Abrahamic covenant goes through this specific line. From Abraham has a number of famous children, among whom are Isaac and Ishmael. By the way, he had many other children. People think, well, he had 2 children, Isaac and Ishmael. No, he had like a dozen children. But Isaac and Ishmael become the most famous. Ishmael becomes the forefather of our cousins, of our great Arab cousins, the Arab nations. By the way, here's something I believe from the bottom of my kishkas. God loves Jew and Arab equally. I absolutely embrace that. The very name Ishmael literally means God has heard. God heard the cry of Hagar in the wilderness when she was about to die, rescued her and her child, and allowed them to be the great Arab nations. It is a wonderful thing to see Arab believers in Messiah worshiping alongside Jewish believers in Messiah. That was my privilege when I was living in Jerusalem, attending the Messianic Assembly. They had an Arab elder, a brother who was one of the teaching elders there, and in many other congregations across the land that is replicated. And so in the 1 Chronicles passage, the line goes from Abraham through one of Abraham's sons, Isaac. Isaac had 2 very famous sons, Jacob and Esau. The line just goes through Jacob. And then Jacob had 12 sons. A Jewish person today, the simple definition is one who is an ethnic descendant of one of those 12 sons of Jacob, one of the 12 tribes. As you probably know, most Jewish people today have no idea what tribe they are from. Unless your name is Cohen or Levi, and then it's pretty assured that you are a Levite. Others of us, the Shoshanah tribe. So we don't really know. Okay. In your outline, I don't have this on your outline, so let's not turn there. In your outline, we say that there are approaches to studying Jewish history. Once again, approaches. These are classical approaches that over the last 50 years have held sway within the Jewish community and within the academic world. Now, granted, some of these are now shifting in the last 5 or 10 years, there's a blending of these two. But still, if you consult the classic works, you'll find one of the first two approaches. You'll find either the martyr approach, seeing the Jews as oppressed victims, always eking out survival, living on for another day. Cecil Roth is a monumental historian and archivist and scholar who has uncovered many original source documents, and this is his essential take. He doesn't come out and say that he's a pessimist, but he basically says, well, he always seems to highlight the idea of the Jewish people as oppressed victims. In contrast, the hero approach, Max de Montt, wrote a multi-volume set of history of the Jewish people, along with several collaborators, and he sees Jews as victors and overcomers. Both of those approaches have merit depending upon the time period you are in. However, the fatal flaw, and this is the whole reason you're in this course, the fatal flaw with both of these is they don't take into consideration the fact that the God of creation has an eternal covenant with the Jewish people. And that's why the approach we take is the third one, the theological or covenantal approach, which acknowledges the hand of God in Jewish history. Our premise is simply this: you cannot fully understand what is going on within Jewish history without recognizing the unseen hand of the Creator in fulfilling the Abrahamic Covenant. You cannot understand what is going on within Jewish history without seeing the hand of God. That's what I hope to do for us over these weeks. One of the realities of teaching this course and how it's changed is this. When I first heard this course in its full 3-week version was in the early 80s as Arnold taught it in one of the long-gone buildings. Then maybe 10 years later, Dr. Michael Rydelnik, who taught it as well. When Michael and I were not playing practical jokes on Arnold, I was learning a lot from him. And we had some doozies. But this course, when it was taught over 20 years ago, had to be extremely detailed because the only way to find this information, we don't have the Encyclopedia Judaica here. In one of the rooms in the other building is a mammoth set of books, big, beautiful green, looks like the Encyclopedia Britannica, but it's the Encyclopedia Judaica. Beautiful, glossy paper, about 16, 17 volumes. I have a set at home. And you could comb through the Encyclopedia Judaica. You could comb through books of Jewish history, the works of Cecil Roth and Max de Montt and many others, and you could cobble together all of these details. Arnold did us a wonderful favor in that this is his natural bent, pulling together all of these details, presenting it in a digestible form, in a cogent form, so that you can work your way through history. He needed to do that 35 years ago when I first took the course. Today, with 3 clicks, you're on Wikipedia, and some of the best informative, non-biased articles are there on Wikipedia about Jewish history. You want to see the history of the Jewish people in Greece during the 1920s? There's like 3 long paragraphs. History of Jewish people during the Shoah in Greece. I saw this the other day. There's like a page and a half. We're not going to get into that detail. I'm not here to try to replicate that, because I know that in 3 or 4 clicks, you have a world of good, solid information at your fingertips. So what's the importance of being here? It's to see the hand of God through the covenants in Jewish history. That is what we hope to uniquely accomplish during these class periods. We're going to call attention to this third approach, to the theological covenantal approach, which acknowledges, which recognizes the hand of God in Jewish history. Why? because we understand that God has made certain promises. And when we understand those promises, we can see God showing up big time. And so that is our approach to studying Jewish history. So with that, let's jump in with both left feet and talk about some dates, and hopefully your eyes don't glaze over at dates. By the way, I'm going to be providing more handouts to you, and as I said, I am supplementing almost daily this PowerPoint. It's not finished yet. I'm adding charts. I'm going to add stuff to it. And even if you're leaving after this first week, email me. I'll be happy to email to you the final version sometime in late August. It should be fine. So here's a quick note about dates. I am not a stickler for minutia. It doesn't float my boat to argue about dates. I had this very same chart up 5 years ago, and there was a man, God bless him, who was arguing, oh, you're off by 30 years in this one date. And I said, well, could you fill me in? How really was it? What was Moses wearing? You know, was it dusty that day? It's like as though he was there. All of these dates are attempts to reconstruct the information. They're attempts from afar. Every attempt to put together a set of dates is based on certain assumptions that we make. We, as you well know, take a conservative view of the dates. The conservative view tends to put these dates a little earlier. I've seen the arguments from both sides. I think there is more weight and more evidence for these traditional dates. But understand these dates have wiggle room of maybe 50 years or more on either side. And so I'm not, this is not a hill I'm going to die on. It's far more important for you to get the general drift. And here, in my half-completed illustration about the messy room, I don't have a messy room, but I've got bookshelves, okay? I may not have as much on the shelves, but there is an order to them. The order to all of my Bible information are the covenants, because God has arranged Bible history by means of his covenant agreements. And so when I have information, I know that there's a place for it. And when something is out of order, it becomes very quickly discernible. And so just to race through this, and that's all we have time to do for this early biblical period, because as I said to you, the emphasis really for this course is on the post-biblical time period. We know that God calls a man named Abram out of a pagan background. And here I should have a chart. Very good. And this chart will appear on the video as well. Very simply, this is the world of the Eastern Mediterranean. Europe is up there. Martina's house in Italy is that boot thing up over there. Okay? We own, and Shirley are down there someplace, okay, in Liberia. Brooklyn is way off. There's Bakul's house right over there in India. Bakul, you see your house? Look closely. There, it's there. And Asia. So there's the world of the Middle East. And in the ancient world, when God called Avram, there is this land known as Canaan, or Canaan as we mispronounce it in English, the land that would ultimately be known as the land of Israel. You will notice, by the way, one of the things about the land of Israel is that it is the land bridge between three continents. You have Africa down here, you have Europe up there, you have Asia there. They all had to come through the land of Israel. The land of Israel becomes a trade route. Caravans of camels and donkeys would pass up and down the trade routes in Israel. There were two major trade routes that ran north or south, so that people coming from Asia into Africa, into Europe, would go up one of those two trade routes, one that went along the seashore, which was flat, and one that went along essentially just up the hill from the Jordan Valley. There were these two trade routes that are ancient, that go back before the time of Abraham. And so this is the world we're talking about. So back up to the outline. That is the world of the patriarchs, of Abraham and his call. And so Abraham is called out of a pagan background. There's a story that the rabbis tell about Abraham, that Abraham and his father were in Ur of the Chaldees. And Ur of the Chaldees is, when we get back to that up here, Ur of the Chaldees is, it's not marked on the map, but it's at the end of the Persian Gulf there. So the story goes that Abram was assisting his father in the father's shop. The father made idols. According to Jewish tradition, Abram's father made a living by selling idols. And one day, business was so good that they had run out of idols to sell. They just had about a dozen left in the shop, and they were selling about a dozen a day. So Abram's father said, I'm going to go out to the forest, cut some more wood, so I can carve some more idols, and you, Abraham, you're going to watch the shop. And Abram was thinking, no, I want to hang with my friends. I'm a teenager. I don't want to have to watch the shop. And so, Abram's father is yelling at him to do this. So Abram takes his earbuds out and says, what'd you say again? Watch the shop. Okay, so Abram said, okay. So he's sitting around looking at all these idols, and he's saying, I see my father go out and, cut wood, and half the scrawny part we throw into the fire, and the good part he carves into an idol. And in a moment of teenage angst, trying to make the world right, Abram, according to the rabbis, takes an axe, cuts up all the idols, leaves it in the outstretched arms of the largest idol, the Baal idol, and waits for his father to come home. Father comes home, father enters the shop and goes, Oy Gewalt, what happened here? How in the world all my idols are gone? They're all chopped to pieces except this large one idol. And so Abram said, you see what happened was that large one, the only one standing, he had a fight with all the other idols. And they were arguing and yelling and screaming, bipping and bopping. And it was like a ball of dust. And at the end, he was the only one standing. And his father said, that's Shoshanah. Idols can't talk. They can't argue. They can't fight. So Abram looks at his father and says, Pop, you're right. So why are we worshiping them? Where in the Bible is that found? It ain't. It's one of the stories that the rabbis tell. So the rabbis say from that day, Abram and his father became worshipers of the one true God. That's a bonus. That's not part of real Jewish history, but understand that the rabbis like to tell stories. When the story isn't apparent, let's just make up a story. So we will resume tomorrow with Abram's son Isaac and go forward from there. You are dismissed.